Welcome to Week 1 of SGS 304, Foundations of Cross-Cultural Awareness. Prior to starting this module, please make sure that you have reviewed the syllabus and course introduction video. The topic for this week focuses on unpacking a rather loaded question. What is culture and cultural competency? While there are many different ways to think about the concept of culture, the particular framework from which we will approach the subject for the purposes of this course will be introduced. Accordingly, our objectives for this week are to discuss what culture is and why we might endeavor to study it. We'll review 6 cultural competencies that will be explored in this course. Finally, I'll introduce the cultural artifact exercise that you will complete in the online Blackboard site for the course. To get started, let's introduce the concept of culture as it is being used in this course and dive below the surface to begin to uncover the hidden dimension. This course was designed with students who are planning to study, intern, do research, or volunteer abroad in mind. For those of you who are already signed up to participate in one of these activities abroad, you likely have many questions and concerns that are logistical in nature, such as determining whether or not you require a visa to enter your host country, how you will access your funds, where you will live, and how you will get around. However, going abroad to participate in any of these activities is so much more than working through the logistical matters that travel brings about. Going abroad to study or intern, working in a global context, and developing intercultural competency is about better understanding yourself and the ideas, values, and beliefs of your own culture and your new host culture. I'd like for you to pause for a moment and reflect on a few things in that statement. First, notice that developing intercultural competency is not just concerning yourself with the host culture. Cross-cultural awareness begins with developing a nuanced understanding of your own identity and culture. For how can you begin to understand another culture before you have defined those aspects that constitute your own? Next, notice the words I've highlighted here: ideas, values, and beliefs. When we discuss culture, these are some of the core components that begin to help us unpack the complex concept of culture. So how do we define culture exactly? It's probably no surprise that such a heavy concept like culture has been studied and defined in many different ways. Depending upon the goals you might have, you might subscribe to any number of definitions. However, for the purposes of this course, we need to have a common definition that we can operationalize, and so I would like to propose that we use this definition as we work throughout this course at unpacking some of these complicated concepts. Culture is the shared set of values, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors which are widely held by the majority of the members of the host culture. So now that we have established a definition of culture from which we might begin to explore different cultural competencies, what is meant by the hidden dimension of culture? One of the most often used analogies when introducing the concept of culture is that of an iceberg. Although this analogy might oversimplify an admittedly deep topic, it can be useful to provide a basic understanding of what makes culture so difficult to pin down under one definition. Here you'll see 2 images of icebergs. If you've ever seen an iceberg before, then you know that the visible portion that is above water represents just a fraction of the entire mass. The majority of an iceberg is hidden beneath the surface of the water. So too are most aspects of culture hidden from the casual traveler or observer. In order to develop a true understanding of other cultures, you have to look past surface level manifestations of any given culture. Doing so may require significant time, the help of cultural informants, and effort on your part to not make snap judgments or oversimplifications of what you are observing. In fact, there are some hidden aspects of cultures that a non-native may never fully grasp due to not being born as a member of that culture. I've selected these 2 images of icebergs for different reasons. The image on the left shows that the visible aspects of culture are often behaviors or words or actions which are apparent to the casual observer. Often when we are traveling, these are the most easily evident aspects of the host culture that make us immediately realize we are no longer in our home culture. In looking at the iceberg on the right, you can see that these include other languages, art, food, entertainment, dress, dancing, and so on. These are all observable aspects of culture that are relatively easy to spot to someone entering a new culture. However, once we dip below the surface, things begin to get a little more complex. The iceberg on the left introduces these heavier concepts. Many of these unobservable traits of culture are related to a culture's core values. You'll see that these include things such as what constitutes good versus bad, right versus wrong, or what is acceptable and unacceptable. The iceberg on the right gives a lot of good examples of these unobservable aspects of culture. For instance, you can't easily observe how a society generally approaches problem solving, or what incentivizes people in a certain culture to work. Similarly, notions of modesty or ideals governing child raising are often deeply embedded in a culture and require that we spend a significant amount of time interacting with the host culture to develop a nuanced understanding of how a particular culture approaches these and other concepts. Finally, I especially like the model on the left because it includes formative factors. These are the forces which create, define, and mold a culture's core values, because of course, no culture exists in a vacuum. Therefore, things such as economics, history, and religion are all working to shape the largely unobserved core values that define any given culture. Hopefully, this analogy helps you begin to understand that truly understanding another culture requires more than just a casual visit or interaction. I hope that when you travel abroad, you will remember this example as you seek to understand other cultures. Be careful not to quickly assign a label or judgment on something based on a quick observation, but instead do your best to dive below the surface and ask yourself and those whom you meet why things are done a certain way and for what reasons. Let's take a look at one common example that comes up when examining culture at a deeper level. This involves the idea of individualistic cultures versus collectivist cultures. In individualistic cultures, the needs of an individual are placed before those of the group. Oftentimes, independence is highly valued, and the notion that we each work to improve our own life is the dominant line of thinking. If you grew up in American culture, then this probably seems very familiar, as the United States is one of the most individualistic cultures there is. The converse then are collectivist cultures. In a collectivist culture, the survival and success of a group ensures the well-being of the individual. Collectivist societies place a greater emphasis on the overall well-being of the entire society. Gains at the individual level, especially if they might cause harm to the greater society, are not valued as much as policies and practices that would provide greater well-being for the entire society. Many European nations which operate under a more socialist political mindset are much more collectivist in nature than the United States is. This is but one dimension of culture that we will continue to explore that illustrates an aspect of the cultural iceberg that is usually invisible under the surface. While there might be a few telltale signs of these aspects once one really gets to know a culture, the reality is that notions of individualism and collectivism are largely unobservable when first observing a culture. It is only after really getting to know many members of that host culture and their underlying beliefs, values, and behaviors that a sense of where the culture lies on this continuum is revealed. Next, we'll look at 6 specific cultural competencies that this course will aim to help you develop in preparation for your future education abroad program. What does it mean to be culturally competent? This is another difficult question to answer. However, you can think of being culturally competent as successfully interacting with those from different cultures. Obviously, though, it then becomes important to think about how we are defining success. One such way we might look at success comes from a framework developed by a researcher on the development of intercultural competencies, Dr. Darla Deerdorf. Her framework divides intercultural competencies into 3 main areas: knowledge, skills, and attitudes. For this course, we'll be looking to develop 2 competencies within each area. First, in the domain of knowledge, we'll want to develop a cultural self-awareness, that is, a good understanding of your own culture. As already mentioned, it would be very difficult to attempt to understand another culture before you understand your own. The second competency is a knowledge of cultural worldview frameworks. There are a few frameworks that we will cover in this course that will help you begin to understand the different frames or vantage points other cultures might approach their lives. You can think of these as lenses. Next, in the domain of skills, we'll examine what it means to be culturally empathetic and learn about the role of verbal and nonverbal skills across cultures. Finally, with attitudes, we will discuss the importance of curiosity and openness as they relate to becoming culturally competent. You might be interested to know that curiosity has been identified as the #1 cultural competency sought by multinational companies in terms of hiring new employees. It's important to note that Deardorff's framework illustrates that intercultural competence is a process, a lifelong process. There's not one point at which an individual becomes completely interculturally competent. Thus, it is important to pay as much attention to the development process of how one acquires the necessary knowledge, skills, and attitudes as one does to the actual aspects of intercultural competence, and as such, critical reflection becomes a powerful tool in the process of intercultural competence development. In addition to examining these cultural competencies, this course has been designed under the premises of a theoretical framework, so it's important to briefly highlight this framework so you understand certain assumptions that are being made. Jacques Mezereau's theory of transformative learning is a theory that helps explain how learning takes place for adult learners. The basic premise is that individuals change their frames of reference by critically reflecting on their assumptions and beliefs, and by consciously making and implementing plans that bring about new ways of defining their worlds. In terms of the journey we all take in developing cultural competencies, this is very applicable because developing the competencies is highly dependent upon our ability to change our frames of reference. One reason why education abroad activities, such as studying, interning, or volunteering abroad, can be so impactful in this capacity is because of their ability to challenge long-held assumptions and beliefs. Think about how traveling abroad will likely push yourself outside of your comfort zone, and how some values, beliefs, and behaviors you typically have had might be challenged. However, it is not enough to challenge these notions. One must critically reflect on these experiences and then act on that reflection to implement change. Mezereau describes transformative learning then as having 5 distinct phases. First, there is a disorienting dilemma. For the purposes of this course, for many of you, the disorienting dilemma can be thought of as your upcoming study abroad experience. Although it will likely be a positive experience, everyone is likely to experience some degree of disorientation or being outside of your comfort zone. Next, critical reflection occurs. As you go through the disorienting dilemma, you should be asking questions about why it might be so disorienting. For instance, what long-standing notions of your own are being challenged? And why might that host culture operate that way? This leads into reflective discourse. This suggests that independent reflection alone is not enough to lead someone on the path of transformative learning. Instead, it is important for an individual to engage with others in discussing their reflections and suppositions about the disorienting dilemma. In the context of study abroad, your program leader, peers, and host country contacts are all wonderful people with whom you can engage in reflective discourse. Next, a plan of action is developed. This plan should be based on the takeaways you have from reflecting and discussing with appropriate people. You may decide to change a behavior you typically have or solve a problem a new way thanks to something you've learned from this disorienting experience. And finally, that brings us to reintegration, where after successful implementation of the action, you are now able to integrate the new practice, belief, behavior, or idea into your old way of life. As you see, transformative learning theory is one great way in which we can leverage the maximum potential study abroad has to help us become more culturally competent. This can only happen, though, if we are mindful throughout the experience of being abroad and actively engage in reflection and discussion. To end this week's lecture, let's take a quick look at the themes of the weeks ahead. One of the main aims of the course is to help you be a more informed and culturally empathetic traveler for your upcoming international experience. The brief video we're about to watch is a comedic one, but there are some good lessons we can take away. Let's have a quick watch. Please note that if the quality of the video doesn't work for you in this recording, the YouTube link is here on the screen, or you can search Stuff Study Abroad Students to Watch, and the video will also be posted in Blackboard. All right, a couple minutes while I get it pulled up for us here.
Fries, chips. Do you think we could drink drink the water? How do they know we're American? It's called a Toblerone. This has literally changed my life. Can you take a picture of me? Well, I have wine class, and then fashion class, and then cooking class. Yeah. Do we have to tip here? Why do they hate ice? It's like all coins. It's okay, they don't understand English. I love Nutella. Can you take a picture of me? But it's a hostel. Got this in Paris. Please get my passport. The kids here are just so cute. I want to take one home. It's like Monopoly money. Can you take a picture of me? She totally went native. I think I should take up smoking. You know, this is so much better in Europe. They all look alike. This is so popular in Australia. How much is this in dollars? Do you want to look at my pictures? Well, when I was in Spain. Can you take a picture of me? How many countries have you been to? Have you ever heard of Ryanair? This is so transformative, I can't even put it into words. All the rage in Bolivia. We're so poor here, but so happy. There's so much American music here. You have to see this picture. Go to Copacabana. Could you take a picture of me? With glass. Oh, glass.
All right, let's just jump back into our presentation now. So this video was obviously created in part to be humorous, but I think it depicts some common pitfalls that young, ignorant college students sometimes fall into when engaging in study abroad. How do you think the host culture would receive someone like the student depicted in this video? What stereotypes of American college students might be perpetuated if we act the same way as the student in the video while we're abroad? What sorts of experiences to really learn about the host culture do we miss out on if we act in this way? Consequently, during these 7 weeks together, we will attempt to move beyond the learning that takes place in this video. The goal will be to develop an awareness and sensitivity of intercultural learning. In addition, you will be better enabled to understand your own culture so you can comprehend other cultures at a deeper level and in a more meaningful way. In addition to a discussion board topic for this week, there is a short activity in which each of you will participate. The activity involves sharing of a cultural artifact. You can think of a cultural artifact as virtually any object that communicates a specific aspect of your own culture. I'll model this activity for you here, and then you will have a chance to share your own cultural artifact with the class by creating a brief 1 to 2 minute video where you share your artifact and describe why you selected it, what it means to you, and how it represents an aspect of your culture or someone else's culture. It's important to note that this should not describe an aspect of culture, it's important to note that this should describe an aspect of culture and not personality. So here's my example. I'm choosing my iPhone as my cultural artifact. I selected my iPhone because I think it helps explain several interesting aspects of my culture as a young American professional. First, the iPhone is known to be an innovative piece of technology, and Americans are often regarded by people from other cultures as being innovative. Next, my iPhone is essential for me to be productive and punctual, another 2 traits that are commonly assigned to the American culture. I've integrated my work email and linked my calendars to my iPhone so that way I can maintain high levels of productivity and help manage my time so that way I do not show up to my meetings late. However, I also think my iPhone is indicative of some not so positive aspects of the American lifestyle. As I go about my day, I have to sometimes consciously pull myself away from my phone to find a good balance between work and personal life. Second, of course, the iPhone is also great for personal entertainment, and it can easily cause us to be obsessed with social media. These are all aspects of our current culture that are constantly discussed. Hopefully that example showed you that a cultural artifact can be nearly any object you have on hand, as long as you discuss what it means to you and how it exemplifies certain aspects of your culture. So have fun with this activity. I look forward to seeing what artifacts you each select. So that concludes this week's lecture. Please check the syllabus and Unit 1 folder on Blackboard for information about the homework assignments due this week. Thanks for your time and good luck this week.